Hi there, my name is Sarah Abbott, and I am very happy to be here with you today as part of the double session entitled, Can the More Than Humans Speak? Other Ways of Knowing in Interspecies Communication, that has been organized by Paul Moss as part of the American Association of Geographers conference in 2020. I'd like to begin my session today by asking everyone to just take a couple of breaths just to ground in this moment and let everything else fall away. And in your own way, if you would join me in acknowledging the land and the elements that sustains all of life on the planet for non-humans and humans alike. And to acknowledge the original peoples in the land that you find yourselves in. I am coming to you from Treaty 4 territory in Saskatchewan, and that is the original homelands of the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota nations and their vibrant cultures, as well as the homelands of the Métis. So thank you to Paul for accepting my proposal to be a part of this session. So this is the title of my talk, Tree Talking and Collaboration Toward Restoring Equitable Relations and Earth's Natural Systems. The talk is going to be based in my research findings, which I will give a brief overview of, and touch on the science, and then move mostly into my findings. My doctoral title is An Ethnography of Trees, Sensuous Scholarship in Plant Ontologies and Environmental Empathy. And I'm looking at the consciousness, intelligence, sentience, relationality, and communications of trees, as well as interspecies communication between trees and humans. The methodologies that I worked with were public ethnography and indigenous research methodologies. Public ethnography situates me as an activist and is also forcing me, in a good way, to share my academic knowledge with the public, and I'm doing that through a film. And just as a side note, if you're interested in seeing the film once it's released for the public, please make a little note in the chat window. You can just write film and your email address, and I'll keep track of your contact information. So I traveled to 7 countries, 3 continents, and I did interviews in English and Spanish with 22 people. I attended workshops on interspecies communication and led a few of my own with regards to trees when I was able to do that in association with some of the talks that I've been giving for the public, which is another aspect of my public ethnography. The people who I interviewed were tree knowers, as I came to call them. They're people who work and know trees in various ways, trees and plants, and they come from the areas of biology and resource management. They include a plant scientist, a philosopher of plant science, an arborist, a former logger, agronomist, forest managers, a tree specialist, working with the Palo Santo tree in Ecuador, indigenous elders, and tree and interspecies communicators. And I'm showing this slide here as a gesture of offering tobacco to trees. This is what one of my participants is doing in this photo. So we're seeing more and more through science that beings in nature form their own communities, and that's specific to this talk. Trees have various ways of communicating. We know about the wood wide web, or the communication between trees via their roots and their root systems, the chemical compounds, and also tree songs, which has come through my research. As one of my participants, an agronomist and retired academic, Clabert Rivas-Carrion, said, only 10% of what a plant has been studied by science. And some of you might be familiar with Michael Marder. He's a scholar of philosophy based in Spain. He writes on plant rights and intelligence, and I am very fortunate to have him on my committee. And when I was speaking to him about his writing, he indicated that when he first published in 2007, there was next to nothing on the subject of plant intelligence. And now, Monica Gagliano, John Ryan, and Patricia Vieiro, in their introduction to their book, The Language of Plants, report that between 2012 and 2017, the ratio of papers published on plants compared to animals is 1 to 2. The concept biosocial becomings, which comes from anthropologist Tim Ingold, views non-human and human life as evolving equally and intrinsically through both social and biological influences. Humans and non-humans are, quote, fluid beings with flexible, porous boundaries. They are necessarily embedded in relations that are nearly purely biological nor purely social. Their essence is constantly in the making, rather than something fixed and predictable. As such, all creatures should be thought of not in terms of what they are, but what they do, not as beings, but as becomings, not as discrete and preformed entities, but as trajectories of movement and growth. So often there is the perception that trees and plants can't do such things as move and speak, or have brains equal to mammalian brains. Anthropocentric prejudice maintains that position that non-humans are lesser than humans. We need to allow for the difference. And I love this quote from Chris Beeman, who's an academic at Brandon University in Canada. He talks about giving ourselves over to another in order to hear another. So I'm going to move to the themes that have emerged in my findings, especially in the realm of tree-human communication. So for me, as I've moved through my research, there were just way too many experiences that I heard about, I witnessed, I experienced myself, to consider communication with trees as whimsy or not to be taken seriously. Many people confide in me that they talk with trees when I've given my tree talks. And I'm not anthropomorphizing. Trees are not humans, so we cannot speak of them as if they are. Trees are beings like humans and animals. There is an overlap in experience of being at the same time as there are differences. So the people that I interviewed who communicate with trees engage with rigor to decipher messages. And one of the first people that I'll introduce you to here is Basha Alexander. I took a few workshops with her and her partner, Jim Conroy, and there are so many methods to communicate with trees. They basically get down to being quiet, opening ourselves up to a kind of feeling, hearing, working with intuition. It takes practice. There's discernment. There's that I've come to call it like the intuitive field, where we feel through our various intuitive senses, and everyone is different. And there's, again, techniques of silence and stillness. And as Jim and Basha indicated, when messages come through, they're not necessarily things that we would know or think of. And their trees have just so much knowledge. And another person, Mare Cromwell, who you'll see in a minute in a slide, she was talking with a tree during our time together, and the elm gave her an image of a library and said that trees have far more extensive knowledge than humans probably could ever have. So in this image, you can maybe see that Basha Alexander is leading participants in a tree workshop through a meditation to connect them more deeply with the tree. And there were always some very interesting experiences that people shared and messages here when that happened. So I also interviewed Doreen Spence, a Cree elder from Saddle Lake First Nation in Alberta. And I'm going to share with you a quote that from our interview that speaks to teachings on communication with trees and asking permission. And often we just go up to a tree and fondle it, and sometimes there's violence that happens to that tree from a person, and there's never consideration to introduce oneself to a tree. And we don't do that with each other. We actually stop and we're not in each other's faces and we say, hey, my name is Sarah, can I talk with you for a few minutes? I don't come up and interrupt you and what's going on in your life. So this wonderful story, Doreen had been asked by German acquaintances if she would take them into an Alberta forest. In her words, We got out of the car and this old guy puts his backpack on and he was going to go in. And I said to him, no, it's not our right just to walk into the forest and do what we do. I said, no, you have to ask permission. And those trees just went still, like very still. And then as soon as I asked for permission, gave my offering, their little leaves started clapping. And they were just very happy that we had asked permission to go in the forest, that we wouldn't harm anything, that we wouldn't be taking anything. And in this image of Doreen, she's doing this to mimic the ways that the leaves were just clapping. And I feel that this story speaks to the importance of offering tobacco to trees, and it stands as a good rule of thumb when stepping into non-human territories. So here's Jim Conroy that I mentioned, and he has a lot of stories of mutual healing. He experienced that himself where, well, he's a tree whisperer and he goes all over North America, healing various people's trees of different diseases and just encouraging the trees to connect with the systems that keep the water moving and throughout the tree and into the leaves. And Jim did go through some cancer treatment and was experiencing healing from the trees that he was working with. And he's got a bit of a hunchback there because he's always leaning over and hugging the trees, tapping on the trees, kissing the trees. And through Jim and Basha, I learned that cutting down trees is a traumatic event. There needs to be communication before that happens, and telling them what's happening and encouraging them to move their energy into a different spot. And here's an image of a tree being cut down in a cityscape, and the other trees around it, this tree that's being cut, they know it's being cut, and they get really nervous that they might be next. So Jim will, if he sees a scene like this, he will go to all of the trees and tell them that they are fine. Also, when a tree is being transplanted, it's important to ask them which direction they want to be facing, and questions like that. So here is Mayor Cromwell. And here is where I want to talk about the stories that I've been hearing from various people who speak with trees, that the trees want to collaborate with us at this time. They feel, of course, they have an incredible amount of knowledge on how to clean up the systems on Earth that we humans have affected with our lifestyle and our extraction and toxins that we have put into our environment. They are aware of climate change and the ecocide that's happening. When I was speaking with Jim with the ash, I asked what the ash thought about that, and Jim indicated that he was getting an image of a person choking, and the air quality is very greatly compromised, not only for humans, but the trees as well. And the trees are not judging us. They don't hold on to emotions like us, but they kind of wish that we would get it together. And again, they do want to collaborate with us. I think moving towards a place of empathy can help us with reconciliation with the earth, making sure that we ask trees, working with interspecies communicators of repute to do this, especially for researchers who are working with trees or any non-human, seeking and respecting permission. So sometimes a tree might not want to be talked to, and it's really important to respect that because we don't know why. So honoring the intelligence of the forest, standing up for something unorthodox, working with trees, communicating with trees. Communication with trees really happens at a different level, and we're not engaged in that level. As it's kind of cliche to say we're so disconnected from nature, but we are. And the more that we practice this quiet opening, the more we can hear. And that really causes a paradigm shift, I think. And we do become more empathic towards nature, nature's intelligence, nature's communities. So I'm going to wrap up now. Thank you so much for listening, and do look forward to hearing from you if you have any questions. Have a great rest of the session.